The rain hammered against my office window like Sophie's credit card bills hammered my bank account. Relentless, expensive, and completely out of my control. I stared at the spreadsheet on my laptop screen, the numbers blurring together as I calculated how much my wife had spent on essential skincare products this month. $3,000. On face cream that probably cost $12 to manufacture in some lab where they laughed at idiots like me who actually paid for it. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. My name's Ryan Mitchell, and I'm what you'd call a professional problem solver. Project manager at TechFlow Solutions, where I spend my days untangling other people's messes and pretending to care about quarterly projections. The irony wasn't lost on me that I could fix everyone else's problems except the one sleeping in my bed every night. Ryan, Sophie's voice cut through the apartment like a fire alarm at 3 a.m. Are you seriously still working? I glanced at the clock. 9:30 p.m. Not exactly burning the midnight oil, but Sophie operated on influencer time, where anything before noon was considered early and any work past dinner was a personal attack on her lifestyle. She burst into my office, our spare bedroom that I'd converted into a workspace, after she decided the living room needed to be Instagram ready at all times. Sophie looked like she'd stepped out of a magazine, which was the point. Every outfit was content, every moment was a potential post, every conversation was an opportunity to talk about herself. I've been calling your name for 10 minutes, she said, hands on her hips. She was wearing a new dress I didn't recognize, which meant it was probably worth more than my car payment. Sorry, I was focused. Just trying to make sure we can afford rent next month. I saved my work and turned to face her, bracing myself for whatever crisis had emerged from her phone screen this time. Don't be dramatic. We're fine. She waved her hand dismissively, the gesture sending her designer bracelets jangling. Besides, I have a brand partnership meeting tomorrow. Could be worth $5,000. Could be. The magic words that had been floating our sinking ship for the past 6 months. Sophie's influencer career was like a slot machine. Occasionally, it paid out enough to justify the constant investment, but mostly it just ate money while flashing pretty lights. That's great, hun. What's the brand? It's this amazing skincare line from Switzerland. They want me to do a whole routine video, maybe even a collaboration post with some other girls. Her eyes lit up the way they used to when she talked about our future together. Now that spark was reserved for follower counts and engagement rates. I nodded and smiled, playing the supportive husband role I'd perfected over the past 2 years. Sounds promising. What did you need? Oh, right. Your brother called. He wants to know if we're coming to his birthday party this weekend. Ethan's birthday. I'd completely forgotten. My younger brother tended to have that effect on people, not because he was forgettable, but because he was the kind of guy who made everything look effortless. While I stressed about spreadsheets and mortgage payments, Ethan bartended at the trendy spot downtown, dated casually, and somehow always had money for whatever he wanted to do. Of course we're going. I'll call him back. Actually, I already told him we'd be there. Sophie's tone shifted slightly, taking on that careful casualness that meant she was about to say something I wouldn't like. He sounded really excited to see me. There it was. That subtle jab, just enough to hurt but not so much that I could call it out without looking like the one overreacting. Sophie had been making comments about Ethan for months now, how funny he was, how he really got her sense of humor, how different he was from me. Never anything overtly inappropriate, just enough to plant seeds of doubt and keep me off balance. I'm sure he's excited to see both of us, I said carefully. Well, obviously, but you know how Ethan is. He's just so alive. Like, when was the last time you told a joke that actually made me laugh? The question hung in the air like smoke from a house fire. I could feel something fundamental shifting between us, some invisible line being crossed. 6 months ago, I would have scrambled to defend myself, maybe tried to crack a joke right then to prove her wrong. Tonight, I just looked at her. I don't know, Sophie. When was the last time you laughed at anything that wasn't on your phone? Her face went through several expressions in quick succession: surprise, anger, and finally that cold calculation that meant I'd just given her ammunition for whatever fight she'd been looking to start. Excuse me? Are you seriously going to blame me for your boring personality? I'm not blaming you for anything. I'm just saying, maybe the problem isn't that I'm not funny enough. Maybe the problem is that we don't actually enjoy each other's company anymore. It was the most honest thing I'd said to her in months, and judging by the way her eyes widened, she knew it. For a second, I thought she might actually engage with what I'd said, maybe admit that we'd been circling the drain for a while now. Instead, she grabbed my laptop and slammed it shut so hard I heard something crack inside. There. Now you can focus on being a better husband instead of staring at numbers all night. The laptop made a sad electronic wheeze and went dark. 2 years of project files, personal documents, photos from back when Sophie and I were actually happy, all of it potentially gone because my wife couldn't handle a moment of uncomfortable truth. I stared at the broken machine, feeling something cold and analytical click into place in my brain. This wasn't a moment of anger or poor judgment. This was Sophie showing me exactly who she was and what she thought of the work that paid for her lifestyle. That laptop cost $1,500, I said quietly. So, we have insurance. No, Sophie, I have insurance. On the laptop I bought with money I earned at the job you just told me to ignore. She opened her mouth to respond, then seemed to think better of it. Instead, she grabbed a pair of my boxers from the laundry basket by the door and threw them at my head. "Even these get more action than I do," she screamed and stormed out of the room. I sat there for a moment, my underwear draped over my shoulder like the world's most pathetic Medal of Honor, listening to Sophie slam doors and mutter angry commentary about my shortcomings as a husband. Through the window, I could see Mrs. Grant from next door peeking through her curtains, probably wondering if she should call the police or just turn up her TV. I picked up my phone and started taking pictures of the broken laptop from multiple angles, documenting the damage with the same methodical attention to detail I brought to work projects. If Sophie wanted to escalate things, I'd make sure I had evidence of who threw the first punch. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Hey, gorgeous. Can't wait to see you tomorrow. M." The message was clearly meant for Sophie, who'd probably given out my number by mistake. Or maybe not by mistake. Maybe this was just another way to keep me guessing, another little psychological pinprick to remind me that I wasn't enough. I screenshotted the message and added it to my growing collection of evidence. Then I opened my laptop, or tried to. The screen flickered once and died completely, taking with it any illusion that this marriage was worth saving. From the living room, I could hear Sophie on the phone with someone, her voice taking on that breathy, flirtatious tone she used to use with me. "I know, right? He's been so intense lately, it's like I can't even do anything without him overanalyzing it." I walked to the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water, thinking about the Swiss skincare partnership that might be worth $5,000, the credit card bills that definitely were worth $3,000, and the text message from M, who was clearly worth more to my wife than I was. The only thing Sophie ever broke faster than my laptop was her own sense of invincibility. She just didn't know it yet. I spent the next morning at the Apple store, watching a 19-year-old genius explain to me that my laptop had suffered what he called catastrophic impact damage, with the kind of enthusiasm usually reserved for discussing rare diseases. The hard drive was intact, but I'd need a completely new machine to access it. "So you're saying my wife basically threw $1,500 in the trash," I said, signing the repair estimate. Well, technically she threw $1,500 at the floor, but yeah, same result. The kid, his name tag said, Brandon, looked like he'd seen this exact scenario before. Happens more than you'd think. Usually it's angry teenagers, but we get a few domestic situations. Domestic situations. like my marriage was a natural disaster that occasionally produced expensive debris. I was walking back to my car when my phone rang. Sophie's contact photo filled the screen, a selfie she'd taken last month where she looked absolutely perfect and completely unreal. "Ryan, where are you? I woke up and you were gone. Getting your handiwork repaired. The laptop's over." Silence on the other end. I could practically hear her calculating whether to apologize or double down on being the victim. "Look, I'm sorry about last night. I was just stressed about the brand meeting, and you were being kind of cold." Kind of cold. That's what honesty looked like to Sophie, an unprovoked attack on her happiness. "It's fine," I said, because fighting about it wouldn't bring my laptop back. "How did the meeting go?" "Oh, it's not until this afternoon, but I'm really nervous. This could be huge for my career." Her career. The word hung between us like a bad joke. Sophie had been building her brand for 3 years now, and the closest she'd come to making real money was a sponsored post for teeth-whitening strips that paid $300. "I'm sure you'll do great. Listen, I need to get to work. We'll talk tonight." "Wait, Ryan, I love you." She said it the way people say "bless you" after a sneeze. Automatic, meaningless, just something you're supposed to do. I used to say it back immediately, but lately there was always a pause while I tried to remember if I meant it. "Love you too," I said, and hung up before the pause got too long. At the office, I threw myself into work with the kind of focus that comes from having nowhere else to put your energy. I was deep in a project timeline when Marta knocked on my cubicle wall. "Rough night?" she asked, nodding at the temporary laptop I'd borrowed from IT. Marta Rodriguez was the kind of coworker who noticed things, not in a nosy way, but with the quiet attention of someone who actually cared about the people around her. She was 5 years older than me, divorced, and had the kind of practical wisdom that comes from having your life fall apart and then rebuilding it yourself. Sophie and my laptop had a disagreement. The laptop lost. Ouch! That's an expensive disagreement. Yeah, well, marriage is full of expensive disagreements. Marta gave me a look that was equal parts sympathy and concern. "You want to talk about it? I've got experience with marriages that communicate through property damage." I almost said no, the way I always did when people offered to listen to my problems. But something about the way she asked, like she actually wanted to help instead of just collecting gossip, made me reconsider. "Maybe later. Right now, I just want to focus on something I can actually fix." "Fair enough. But Ryan, whatever's going on at home, don't let it make you think you're the problem. Sometimes, people break things because they're broken themselves." She walked away before I could respond, leaving me staring at my borrowed laptop screen and thinking about broken things and the people who break them. I spent my lunch break doing something I'd never done before, investigating my own wife. It started innocently enough, just checking her Instagram to see if she'd posted anything about the brand meeting. But Sophie's social media presence was like an iceberg. What you could see publicly was just the tip of a much larger structure. She'd been tagged in posts I didn't recognize, at places I didn't remember her going. There was a photo from last Tuesday where she was at some upscale gym downtown, wearing workout clothes that cost more than most people's rent. The caption read, "Getting swole with my trainer. J'attire fitness motivation, j'attire blessed." Sophie didn't work out. She'd bought a gym membership 2 years ago and used it exactly 3 times before deciding that her body type wasn't really suited for traditional exercise. But here she was, glowing with post-workout endorphins and looking better than I'd seen her look in months. I clicked on the gym's location tag and scrolled through other posts. That's when I saw him, a guy who looked like he'd been carved out of marble and then taught to operate gym equipment. The kind of guy who made other men suddenly aware of every soft spot on their own bodies. His name was Mason Torres, according to his profile. Personal trainer, life coach, and apparently the kind of person who thought inspirational quotes over shirtless photos counted as content. His bio read, "Transforming bodies and minds. DM for rates. No excuses, your grind never stops. I scrolled through his posts, and there she was, Sophie, in the background of a video about proper squat form. Sophie, tagged in a story about crushing your goals. Sophie, looking at Mason the way she used to look at me before I became just another bill to pay. The text message from M suddenly made a lot more sense. I screenshotted everything, creating a digital paper trail that painted a picture I really didn't want to see. But I kept going, driven by the same methodical thoroughness that made me good at my job. If my marriage was falling apart, I was going to understand exactly how and why. By the time I got home that evening, I had a pretty clear timeline. Sophie had been going to the gym for 6 weeks, always on days when I worked late. She'd been posting less about our relationship and more about self-improvement and finding her authentic self. And she'd been spending money we didn't have on workout clothes, protein shakes, and what she claimed were business lunches. Sophie was in the kitchen when I walked in, cooking dinner for the first time in months. She was wearing one of my old t-shirts and had her hair pulled back in a messy bun, the casual, effortless look that had made me fall in love with her in the first place. "How was work?" she asked, not looking up from whatever she was stirring on the stove. "Fine. How was your meeting?" "Really good. They want me to do a whole series of posts, maybe even a video campaign. We're still working out the details, but it could be worth $10,000. The number had doubled since this morning. Either Sophie was a worse negotiator than I thought, or she was lying to me. Given the evidence I'd collected, I was leaning toward the latter. "That's great, honey. What's for dinner?" "Just pasta, nothing fancy." She finally turned around, and I saw that she was wearing makeup. Not a lot, but enough to look like she'd made an effort. "I thought we could talk. About last night. About us." This was it. The conversation I'd been dreading and hoping for in equal measure. The moment when we either fixed what was broken between us or admitted that it couldn't be fixed. "Okay," I said, sitting down at our small kitchen table. "Let's talk." Sophie served the pasta and sat across from me, her hands folded in her lap like a student waiting to be called on. "I know things have been weird between us lately," she began. "I think we've both been stressed, and maybe we've been taking it out on each other instead of working together." It was a reasonable opening, the kind of thing couples therapy websites probably recommended. But there was something rehearsed about it, like she'd practiced this speech in the mirror. "I agree," I said carefully. "I think we've been living parallel lives instead of sharing one life." "Exactly. Like, we used to talk about everything, and now we barely see each other. You're always working, and I'm trying to build my brand, and we just never connect anymore." She reached across the table and took my hand. Her skin was soft and warm, and for a moment I remembered why I'd married her. Before the credit card bills and the constant selfies and the slow realization that we wanted completely different things from life. "What do you think we should do?" I asked. "I think we should try harder, both of us. Like maybe you could work less, and I could focus more on us instead of just my career." It sounded good. It sounded like exactly what I'd been wanting to hear for months. But I couldn't stop thinking about the photos on Mason's Instagram, the way Sophie looked at him like he was the answer to questions she'd never asked me. "That sounds good," I said. "But Sophie, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." Her hand tensed in mine, just slightly. "Of course. What is it? Are you seeing someone else?" The question sat between us like a lit stick of dynamite. Sophie's face went through the same progression of expressions I'd seen the night before: surprise, anger, calculation. "Are you seriously asking me that?" "I'm asking because I found a text on my phone that was meant for you, from someone named M. And because you've been going to a gym you never mentioned, spending money we don't have, and lying about where you've been." She pulled her hand away and sat back in her chair. "I can't believe you're accusing me of cheating." I'm not accusing you of anything. I'm asking you a direct question and hoping you'll give me a direct answer. The answer is no, Ryan. I'm not seeing someone else. I'm trying to improve myself physically and professionally, and instead of supporting me, you're treating me like a criminal. She was good at this, turning the conversation around, making me the bad guy for asking reasonable questions about unreasonable behavior. It was a skill she'd perfected over the course of our relationship, and it had worked for a long time. But tonight, something was different. Maybe it was the broken laptop or the screenshots on my phone, or just the accumulated weight of too many conversations that felt like negotiations with a hostile foreign power. Okay, I said. If you're not seeing someone else, then you won't mind if I come to the gym with you sometime. Meet this trainer who's been helping you transform your life. Sophie's face went pale. You want to come to my gym? I want to be part of your life, Sophie. Isn't that what we were just talking about? Connecting more, sharing experiences? I don't think that's a good idea. The gym is like my space, where I go to focus on myself. Right. Your space, where you focus on yourself with Mason. The name hit her like a physical blow. She actually flinched, and for the first time in months, I saw my wife without her mask on. She looked scared and guilty and very, very young. How do you know Mason's name? Instagram. Turns out you're not as good at hiding things as you think you are. We stared at each other across the table, the pasta getting cold between us. I could see her trying to decide whether to keep lying or finally tell me the truth. It's not what you think, she said finally. What I think is that my wife has been lying to me for weeks about where she goes and who she sees. What I think is that she's been spending our money on another man and then coming home to cook me dinner and talk about how we need to connect more. Ryan, please, let me explain. Explain what? How you accidentally ended up in another man's Instagram posts? How you accidentally gave him my phone number? How you accidentally spent $3,000 this month on workout clothes for a hobby you accidentally forgot to mention? She started crying then, but they were angry tears, not sad ones. You don't understand. Mason makes me feel alive. He makes me feel like I'm worth something. And I don't? You make me feel like a burden, like everything I do is wrong, like I'm just this expensive problem you have to solve. Mason sees potential in me. Mason sees a married woman with a credit card and low self-esteem. Trust me, I understand his business model. Sophie stood up so fast her chair fell over. You're an asshole, Ryan. You know that? A bitter, jealous asshole who can't stand that someone else sees value in me. I'm the asshole? I'm not the one who's been cheating on my spouse and lying about it for months. I haven't been cheating. We haven't done anything. Yet. The word hung in the air like an accusation and an inevitability. Sophie wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, smearing her carefully applied makeup. I want you to leave, she said. This is my apartment too, Sophie. I pay the rent, remember? Fine, then I'll leave. She grabbed her purse and headed for the door, pausing only to deliver one final shot. Maybe when I'm gone, you can spend some time thinking about why your wife had to look somewhere else to feel appreciated. The door slammed behind her, leaving me alone with 2 plates of cold pasta and the smoking ruins of my marriage. I picked up my phone and started taking pictures of the abandoned dinner, adding them to my growing collection of evidence. Then I called a lawyer. The law office of Patricia Chen looked exactly like what it was, a place where marriages went to die. Beige walls, uncomfortable chairs, and the kind of fluorescent lighting that made everyone look like they were fighting off a hangover. I sat across from Ms. Chen's desk, watching her flip through the folder of evidence I'd assembled over the past week. This is very thorough, she said, adjusting her glasses. Screenshots, financial records, documented property damage. You've basically built our entire case for us. I'm good at documentation. It's what I do for work. Well, it's going to serve you well here. Your wife's spending patterns alone are enough to establish financial irresponsibility, And if we can prove adultery, can we? Prove it, I mean. They claim nothing physical has happened. Ms. Chen gave me the kind of smile that probably cost $500 an hour. Mr. Mitchell, in my experience, when a married person is spending this much time and money on someone who isn't their spouse, the physical relationship is usually just a matter of timing. I'd been thinking the same thing, but hearing it from a professional made it real in a way that hurt more than I'd expected. Sophie and I might have been falling apart for months, but there's a difference between growing apart and being actively replaced. What happens next? I file the papers today. She'll be served within 48 hours. Given the evidence of financial misconduct and potential adultery, I'm confident we can get you a favorable settlement, especially since you're the primary breadwinner. I signed the papers and wrote a check that represented about half of my savings account. As I walked back to my car, my phone buzzed with a text from Sophie. I'm staying at Viv's for a few days. We need space to figure this out. Viv Martinez was Sophie's best friend and enabler, a fellow influencer who treated other people's relationships like content for her own social media drama. If Sophie was staying with Viv, it meant she was preparing for war. I texted back, "Take all the space you need. I'll be here." At work, I threw myself into projects with the kind of intensity that made my co-workers give me a wide berth. Marta was the exception. She kept checking on me with coffee and the occasional reality check. "You look like hell," she said, perching on the edge of my desk with 2 cups from the good coffee shop across the street. "Thanks. That's exactly what every man wants to hear." "I'm serious, Ryan. When's the last time you slept? Or ate something that wasn't from a vending machine?" I tried to remember and came up blank. The past few days had been a blur of legal consultations, evidence gathering, and the kind of obsessive internet research that turns your browser history into a monument to poor life choices. "I'm fine, just dealing with some personal stuff." "The personal stuff being your wife's midlife crisis?" I looked at her sharply. "How did you—" "Ryan, you've been taking screenshots of Instagram posts during meetings. Either your wife is cheating, or you've developed a very specific hobby involving fitness influencers. The fact that my personal drama was visible to my co-workers should have embarrassed me. Instead, it felt like a relief to have someone else acknowledge what was happening. She's been seeing her personal trainer, emotionally if not physically, and she's been lying about it for weeks. Ah, the classic finding herself through someone else's abs. Something like that. I filed for divorce yesterday." Marta nearly choked on her coffee. "Jesus, Ryan, that escalated quickly." "Did it? Because from where I'm sitting, it feels like it took way too long." She studied my face with the kind of attention that made me remember why I'd always liked working with her. Marta was the kind of person who saw problems clearly and solved them efficiently, without drama or unnecessary complications. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Shoot. Are you filing for divorce because your marriage is over, or because you want to hurt Sophie for hurting you?" It was a good question, and I didn't have a good answer. The truth was probably both. I wanted out of a relationship that was making me miserable, but I also wanted Sophie to face consequences for treating our marriage like a side hobby she could ignore whenever something more interesting came along. "Does it matter?" I asked. "It might. If you're doing this out of anger, you might regret it when the anger fades. But if you're doing it because you genuinely don't want to be married to her anymore, well, that's different." I thought about the past 6 months, the constant financial stress, the feeling like I was living with a roommate who occasionally demanded emotional support, the slow realization that Sophie and I wanted fundamentally different things from life. "I don't want to be married to her anymore," I said. "The anger is just motivation to actually do something about it." Marta nodded. "Then you're probably making the right choice. But Ryan, be careful about the revenge stuff. It's tempting, but it usually hurts you more than it hurts them." She was probably right, but I wasn't feeling particularly careful. I was feeling methodical, analytical, and very interested in making sure Sophie understood exactly what she'd thrown away. That afternoon, I did something I'd never done before. I went to Mason's gym. Peak Performance Fitness was exactly what I'd expected. Aggressively modern, intimidatingly clean, and full of people who looked like they'd been assembled from spare parts of Greek statues. I stood in the lobby, wearing my work clothes and feeling like an accountant who'd wandered into a superhero convention. "Can I help you?" The receptionist was a blonde woman in her early 20s who'd clearly been hired for her ability to make gym memberships seem like the key to eternal happiness. "I'm interested in personal training," I said. "I'd like to speak with Mason Torres." "Oh, Mason's amazing. You're going to love working with him. Let me see if he's available." She disappeared into the back, and I used the time to take in my surroundings. The gym was busy for a Wednesday afternoon. Lots of people who either worked flexible schedules or had enough money to treat fitness like a full-time job. I recognized a few faces from Sophie's Instagram posts, which meant this was definitely the right place. "You must be Ryan!" I turned around to find Mason Torres approaching me with the kind of confident stride that suggested he'd never met a problem he couldn't solve with the right combination of protein powder and positive thinking. He was even more intimidating in person, not just physically, though he clearly spent more time on his appearance than most people spend on their careers, but in the way he carried himself, like he was used to being the most important person in any room. "That's me," I said, shaking his hand. His grip was exactly as firm as you'd expect. "Sophie's told me so much about you, man. It's great that you're finally ready to make some changes." The casual mention of my wife's name hit me like a slap. Of course they'd talked about me. Of course Sophie had shared our personal business with this stranger who probably saw her as just another bored housewife looking for validation. "She mentioned me?" "Oh yeah, she's always talking about how she wishes you'd take better care of yourself. But hey, that's why I'm here, right? To help people transform their lives." He said it with the kind of earnest enthusiasm that made me want to punch him in his perfectly symmetrical face. But I'd come here with a specific purpose, and I wasn't going to let my emotions derail it. "Actually, I'm not here about training," I said. "I'm here about my wife." Mason's expression shifted slightly, the professional smile flickering like a neon sign with a loose connection. "I'm sorry?" "Sophie, my wife, who's been spending our money on a gym membership she never mentioned and a trainer who apparently knows more about our relationship than I do." The gym had gotten quieter around us, or maybe I was just more aware of the people pretending not to listen to our conversation. Mason glanced around nervously, clearly realizing that this wasn't going to be the kind of interaction he could handle with motivational quotes and protein shake recommendations. "Look, man, I think there might be some misunderstanding." "No misunderstanding. My wife has been lying to me about where she goes and who she sees. She's been spending money we don't have on workout clothes and training sessions, and she's been getting text messages from someone whose name starts with M." Mason's face went through several expressions before settling on defensive anger. "I don't know what you're trying to imply, but Sophie and I have a professional relationship. I'm her trainer, that's it." Professional. Right. Is it professional to text your clients after hours? Is it professional to pose for Instagram photos with them? Is it professional to discuss their marriage problems? Sophie needed someone to talk to. She's been going through a difficult time. She's been going through a difficult time because she's been lying to her husband and spending money on another man, but I'm sure you helped her work through those feelings. I could see Mason trying to decide whether to keep playing innocent or admit what we both knew was happening. Around us, the gym had gone almost completely quiet. Apparently, my marriage was more entertaining than whatever was on the mounted TV screens. "You know what your problem is?" Mason said, his voice getting louder. "You don't appreciate what you have. Sophie is an amazing woman, and you treat her like she's some kind of burden. Sophie is my wife, and you're a personal trainer who thinks sleeping with married clients is part of your job description. We haven't slept together. The denial came out too fast and too loud, confirming what I'd already suspected. They might not have crossed that particular line yet, but they'd definitely been walking right up to it. Yet, I said, echoing the word I'd thrown at Sophie a few days earlier. But you're working on it, right? All those late-night texts, all those conversations about her terrible husband, all that emotional support while she figures out what she really wants. Mason stepped closer to me, close enough that I could smell his cologne and see the vein pulsing in his forehead. For a moment, I thought he might actually take a swing at me, which would have been perfect for my purposes. Instead, he smiled, a cold, calculating expression that was probably supposed to be intimidating. You know what? You're right. Sophie does deserve better than you, and when she finally figures that out, I'll be here for her. I'm sure you will, right up until she runs out of money to spend on gym memberships and protein shakes. Then you'll move on to the next lonely housewife who needs someone to make her feel special. I turned and walked toward the exit, feeling the eyes of everyone in the gym following me. At the door, I paused and looked back at Mason, who was still standing in the same spot, his hands clenched into fists. Oh, and Mason? You might want to check your car when you leave tonight. Parking lots can be dangerous places. I didn't actually do anything to his car. I'm not a vandal, and I'm definitely not stupid enough to commit crimes in broad daylight. But Mason didn't know that, and the threat would keep him paranoid for days. More importantly, I'd accomplished what I'd come to do. I'd established myself as a presence in their little fantasy, reminded them that actions have consequences, and made it clear that I wasn't going to disappear quietly while they figured out their feelings. As I drove home, my phone buzzed with an angry text from Sophie. How dare you embarrass me at the gym? Mason told me what you did. This is harassment. I screenshotted the message and added it to my evidence folder. Then I texted back, I went to a gym and had a conversation. If that embarrasses you, maybe you should think about why. Her response came immediately. I'm filing for divorce. I can't be married to someone who doesn't trust me. I almost laughed. Sophie was filing for divorce like it was her idea, like she was the one taking control of the situation. She had no idea that I'd already filed, that she was about to be served papers, or that I had enough evidence to make her life very complicated in court. Good luck with that, I texted back. Make sure your lawyer explains community property law to you, and financial responsibility, and adultery statutes. She didn't respond, which was probably smart. But I knew she was panicking, probably calling Viv or Mason or anyone who would tell her that I was the crazy one, that she was the victim in this situation. By tomorrow, she'd know better. By tomorrow, she'd understand that I wasn't the same pushover who'd been quietly paying her bills while she played house with her personal trainer. The only thing Sophie ever broke faster than my laptop was her own sense of invincibility, and I was just getting started. The process server found Sophie at Viv's apartment on Thursday morning, interrupting what appeared to be an Instagram live session about toxic relationships and finding your authentic self. I knew this because Viv posted about it immediately, complete with crying face emojis and hashtags about supporting friends through difficult times. Sophie called me 17 times in the first hour after being served. I let every call go to voicemail, then listened to them while I ate lunch at my desk. The progression was fascinating from a psychological standpoint. Anger, denial, bargaining, more anger, and finally, a kind of desperate confusion as she realized I wasn't going to answer. Ryan, this is insane, she said in voicemail number 12. You can't just divorce me because I have a friend you don't like. Call me back. We need to talk about this like adults. A friend. That's what Mason had become in the official narrative, just a friend who happened to be a 6'2" personal trainer with abs you could use to crack walnuts. I had to admire Sophie's commitment to the story, even when faced with legal documents that detailed her spending patterns and suspicious behavior. Marta stopped by my cubicle around 3 o'clock, carrying coffee and wearing the expression of someone who'd been elected to deliver bad news. So, she said, settling into the chair across from my desk. I heard you went to confront your wife's trainer yesterday. News travels fast. Jennifer from accounting has a membership at that gym. Apparently you caused quite a scene. I looked up from my computer, suddenly aware that my personal drama had become office gossip. Define quite a scene. Well, according to Jennifer, you threatened a man with a crowbar in front of 30 witnesses. I didn't threaten anyone with a crowbar. I didn't even have a crowbar. So what did happen? I gave her the abbreviated version. The confrontation, Mason's admission that he and Sophie had been discussing our marriage, my vague comment about parking lot safety. Marta listened without interrupting, her expression growing more concerned with each detail. Ryan, she said when I finished, you need to be very careful here. I know you're angry, and you have every right to be, but if you start making threats... I didn't make threats. I made observations about urban safety. That's not how it's going to sound if this ends up in court, or if it ends up on social media. She was right, of course. In my anger, I'd been thinking tactically, but not strategically. Confronting Mason might have felt good in the moment, but it also gave Sophie ammunition to paint me as the unstable, controlling husband. Point taken, I said. No more gym visits. Good. Now, can I ask you something else? Shoot. What's your end game here? You've filed for divorce, you've gathered evidence, you've established that your wife is having an emotional affair. What are you hoping to accomplish now? It was the same question she'd asked before, but this time I had a clearer answer. The past week had crystallized something for me. This wasn't just about ending my marriage, it was about making sure Sophie understood that actions have consequences. I want her to face reality, I said. For 3 years, Sophie has lived in this fantasy world where she's an influencer and entrepreneur, where money magically appears to pay for her lifestyle, where she can treat people however she wants without consequences. I want that fantasy to end. And then what? And then she can build a new life based on truth instead of Instagram posts and credit card debt. Marta nodded slowly. That's actually pretty reasonable. But Ryan, you can't force someone to face reality. They have to choose it themselves. Maybe. But I can make the fantasy expensive enough that reality starts looking more attractive. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. This is Mason. We need to talk. Meet me at Riverside Park at 6 p.m. Come alone. I showed the message to Marta, who immediately shook her head. Absolutely not. This has terrible idea written all over it. Probably, but I'm curious what he wants to say. He wants to intimidate you. Or worse. Ryan, this guy is twice your size and clearly not thinking rationally. Don't go. She was probably right, but I was past the point of making safe choices. Sophie and Mason had been operating under the assumption that I was a passive, predictable person who would quietly accept whatever they decided to do. It was time to correct that assumption. I'll be careful, I said. That's what every person says right before they do something incredibly stupid. Riverside Park at 6 p.m. was exactly as ominous as it sounded, mostly empty, poorly lit, and full of shadows that could hide anything from joggers to muggers. I found Mason waiting by the basketball courts, wearing gym clothes and the kind of aggressive posture that suggested this conversation wasn't going to be friendly. You came, he said as I approached. You asked, what do you want? I want you to leave Sophie alone, and I want you to leave me alone. This whole thing has gone too far. This whole thing started when you decided to pursue a married woman. I'm just responding to the situation you created. Mason stepped closer, and I could see the anger radiating off him like heat from a furnace. Sophie's not happy with you, man. She hasn't been happy for months. All I did was show her what it feels like to be appreciated. All you did was take advantage of a woman who was going through a rough patch in her marriage. That's not noble, Mason. That's predatory. Predatory? I helped her. I made her feel beautiful and strong and confident. What have you done for her lately besides complain about money and work all the time? It was a fair question, and I didn't have a good answer. The truth was that Sophie and I had been failing each other for months. She'd been selfish and irresponsible, but I'd been distant and critical. We'd created a perfect storm of mutual resentment. "You're right," I said. "I wasn't a good husband, but that doesn't give you the right to interfere in our marriage." "I didn't interfere. I was just there when she needed someone. You were there because you saw an opportunity. Unhappy wife, disposable income, low self-esteem. You probably have a whole system for identifying women like Sophie." Mason's face flushed red. "You don't know what you're talking about." "Don't I? How many of your clients are married women going through difficult times? How many of them end up paying for extra sessions and personal attention? How many of them think they're special to you?" He swung at me then, a wild, angry haymaker that I saw coming from a mile away. I stepped back, and his fist connected with nothing but air, sending him stumbling forward. "That's assault," I said calmly, pulling out my phone. "In a public park, on camera." I gestured toward the security cameras mounted on the light poles around the basketball court. Mason looked around, suddenly aware of his surroundings and the implications of what he'd just done. You made me... I made you throw a punch? That's an interesting theory. I'm sure the police will find it fascinating." "You can't call the police. It was just... We were just talking." "We were talking. You were committing assault. There's a difference." I could see him trying to calculate his options, probably wondering if he could intimidate me into not reporting this. But I'd been planning for this moment since I sent my first text, and I had no intention of letting him off the hook. "Here's what's going to happen," I said. "You're going to stay away from my wife. You're going to stop texting her, stop training her, stop whatever emotional affair you've been having, and if I see you anywhere near her before our divorce is final, I'm going to make sure everyone at your gym knows exactly what kind of personal training you specialize in. You can't prove anything. I can prove you just tried to hit me. I can prove you've been pursuing a married woman. And I can prove that your gym's insurance probably doesn't cover trainers who sleep with clients." Mason stared at me for a long moment, his hands clenched into fists. I could see him weighing his options, trying to decide if the fight was worth the consequences. "This isn't over," he said finally. "Yeah, it is. You just don't know it yet." He walked away without another word, leaving me alone in the park with my phone and a growing sense that I'd just crossed a line I couldn't uncross. Marta had been right. This was stupid and dangerous, and I was lucky it hadn't gone worse. But it had also been effective. Mason was scared now, aware that his actions had consequences and that I wasn't going to disappear quietly. More importantly, he'd shown his true colors: the anger, the entitlement, the willingness to use violence when his charm didn't work. I drove home, thinking about consequences and choices, about the difference between being a victim and being a participant in your own life. For months, I'd been letting Sophie and Mason write the story of my marriage, accepting their version of events where I was the boring, controlling husband who didn't understand his wife's needs. Tonight, I'd started writing my own version, and I was just getting started. My phone buzzed with a text from Sophie. "Mason told me what you did. You're sick, Ryan. Threatening people, stalking us. This isn't normal behavior." I screenshotted the message and added it to my evidence folder. Then I texted back, "Ask Mason to show you the security footage from tonight. Then ask yourself if this is really the kind of man you want to build a future with." She didn't respond, but I knew she'd gotten the message. Mason had shown her who he really was tonight, and no amount of abs or motivational quotes could cover up the fact that he'd tried to solve a problem with his fists. The only thing Sophie ever broke faster than my laptop was her own sense of invincibility. But Mason was running a close second. The neighborhood association meeting was held the second Tuesday of every month in the community center, a beige rectangle of municipal boredom that smelled like coffee and broken dreams. I'd never attended one before. Sophie had always handled our community engagement, which mostly consisted of posting Instagram stories about local restaurants and complaining about parking. Tonight was different. Tonight, I had a presentation to give. Ryan Mitchell, you said you wanted to address the community about a safety concern? Mrs. Patterson, the association president, looked at me over her reading glasses with the kind of skepticism reserved for people who disrupted routine. That's right. I want to talk about predatory behavior in our neighborhood and how we can protect ourselves and our families. The 15 people in attendance shifted in their folding chairs, suddenly more interested than they'd been during the discussion of streetlight maintenance. Mrs. Grant from next door leaned forward, probably recognizing me as the source of all those interesting arguments she'd been eavesdropping on. I'd spent the past week preparing for this moment, gathering evidence and building a case with the same methodical attention I brought to work projects. The difference was that this time, the project was my life. 3 weeks ago, I discovered that my wife had been having an emotional affair with her personal trainer, I began, clicking to the first slide of my presentation. Tonight, I want to share what I learned about how predators operate in our community and what we can do to protect ourselves. The room went completely silent. This was not the kind of content they were used to at neighborhood association meetings. This man, I clicked to a photo of Mason from his Instagram, systematically targeted married women in our area. He identified women who were unhappy, isolated, or going through difficult times. He offered them attention, validation, and the promise of a better version of themselves. I could see people in the audience pulling out their phones, probably to text their friends about the drama unfolding in the community center. Perfect. The more people who heard this story, the better. The pattern is always the same, I continued, clicking through screenshots of Mason's social media interactions with various women. Excessive personal attention, text messages outside of business hours, gradual isolation from family and friends, and financial exploitation. Mrs. Patterson looked like she wanted to stop me, but she was clearly too fascinated to interrupt. This was probably the most exciting thing that had happened at a neighborhood association meeting in decades. My wife spent over $8,000 in 3 months on this man's services. Gym memberships, personal training, supplements, workout clothes, all while lying to me about where she was going and who she was seeing. I clicked to the financial records I'd compiled, showing Sophie's spending patterns in stark black and white. The numbers were damning, a clear picture of someone whose priorities had become completely disconnected from reality. But the financial cost was nothing compared to the emotional manipulation. This man convinced my wife that her marriage was the problem, that she deserved better, that he was the solution to her unhappiness. The next slide showed the text messages I'd collected, not the explicit ones, which would have been inappropriate for this setting, but the emotional manipulation, the late-night conversations, the gradual erosion of boundaries between trainer and client. The point of sharing this isn't to embarrass anyone, I said, which was only partially true. The point is to help other families recognize these warning signs before they destroy their relationships. I could see Mrs. Grant nodding vigorously, probably thinking about all the neighborhood gossip she'd collected over the years. Other people were taking notes, treating this like a public service announcement instead of a very public airing of my personal business. Predators like this count on shame and secrecy. They count on their victims being too embarrassed to tell anyone what's happening. They count on families falling apart quietly, without anyone asking uncomfortable questions. The final slide was a photo of Mason's gym, along with his full name and business information. If anyone in this room is working with this man, or knows someone who is, please consider whether the relationship is really professional, or if you're being targeted for manipulation. I closed my laptop and looked out at the audience, which was staring at me with a mixture of shock and fascination. This wasn't how neighborhood association meetings usually went. Any questions? Mrs. Patterson cleared her throat. Mr. Mitchell, this is quite serious. Have you reported this to the authorities? I've reported everything that can be legally reported, but emotional manipulation isn't a crime, and neither is taking advantage of lonely housewives. That's why community awareness is so important. What about your wife? Someone called out from the back. Is she safe? It was a good question, and one I'd been thinking about a lot lately. Sophie wasn't in physical danger, but she was definitely in emotional and financial danger. The problem was that she'd chosen that danger, and I couldn't protect someone from their own choices. My wife is an adult who made her own decisions, I said. I hope she learns from this experience, but that's not my responsibility anymore. The meeting broke up shortly after that, with people clustering in small groups to discuss what they'd just heard. I packed up my laptop and headed for the door, feeling lighter than I had in months. The truth was finally out there, documented and witnessed, and impossible to ignore. Mrs. Grant caught up with me in the parking lot. Ryan, dear, I just want you to know that I think you're very brave for speaking out like that. Thank you, Mrs. Grant. I appreciate that. And I want you to know that I saw that young man at your apartment last week, the trainer. He was there when you weren't home. This was news to me, and judging by Mrs. Grant's expression, she knew it was significant. When was this? Thursday afternoon. I saw him go in with Sophie, and they were there for about 2 hours. I thought you should know. Thursday afternoon. While I was at work, while Sophie was supposedly staying at Viv's apartment to figure things out, she'd been bringing Mason to our home. To the apartment I paid for, sleeping in the bed I'd bought, probably laughing about what an idiot I was for not seeing what was right in front of me. Thank you for telling me, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Of course, dear. I hope things work out for you. I drove home thinking about boundaries and violations, about the difference between emotional affairs and physical ones. Sophie had been claiming for weeks that nothing physical had happened with Mason, that they were just friends, that I was overreacting to an innocent relationship. But bringing him to our apartment while I was at work, that wasn't innocent. That was a deliberate escalation, a conscious choice to cross whatever lines were left between them. I was so lost in thought that I almost missed the BMW parked across the street from my building. Almost, but not quite. Mason's car was unmistakable, black, expensive, and detailed to within an inch of its life. He was sitting inside, probably waiting for Sophie to come home from wherever she'd been spending her days. I parked in my usual spot and walked past his car, close enough to tap on the window. Mason rolled it down, his face carefully neutral. What are you doing here? I asked. Waiting for Sophie. She's meeting me here. At my apartment. It's her apartment too. Actually, it's not. Sophie's name isn't on the lease, and she doesn't pay rent. Legally speaking, she's a guest who's overstayed her welcome. Mason's jaw tightened. You can't keep her away from her own home. I can't keep her away, but I can control who she brings with her. And I'm telling you right now, you're not welcome in my building. That's not up to you. Actually, it is. I have a restraining order being processed, and after tonight's neighborhood association meeting, I have about 50 witnesses who can testify to your pattern of predatory behavior. This was a bluff. I didn't have a restraining order, and the neighborhood association meeting wasn't legally relevant. But Mason didn't know that, and the uncertainty was clearly making him nervous. You're crazy, he said. Sophie was right about you. Sophie says a lot of things. The question is whether you're smart enough to figure out which ones are true. Before he could respond, Sophie's Uber pulled up behind his car. She got out, saw both of us, and immediately looked like she wanted to disappear into the sidewalk. What's going on? She asked, looking back and forth between Mason and me. I was just explaining to Mason that he's not welcome in our building, I said. It's not our building anymore, Ryan. I'm moving out. This was news to me, though it probably shouldn't have been. The divorce papers, the neighborhood association meeting, the growing evidence of her affair. Of course, she was moving out. The only question was where she thought she was going. "Moving in with Mason?" I asked. Sophie and Mason exchanged a look that told me everything I needed to know. They'd been planning this, probably for weeks. The emotional affair had become a practical arrangement, with Mason offering Sophie an escape from the consequences of her choices. "That's none of your business," Sophie said. "You're right. Your housing situation stopped being my business the moment you brought another man into my apartment." Sophie's face went pale. "How did you—" "Mrs. Grant saw you Thursday afternoon when you were supposed to be staying at Viv's place to think about our marriage. Instead, you were here with Mason doing God knows what in the bed I paid for." "It's not like that," Sophie said, but her voice lacked conviction. "It's exactly like that. You've been lying to me for months, Sophie, about where you go, who you see, how you spend our money, and now about bringing your boyfriend into our home." "He's not my boyfriend." "Then what is he? Because he's definitely not just your trainer, and he's definitely not just your friend." Sophie looked at Mason, probably hoping he'd jump in with some explanation that would make this all make sense. But Mason was staring at me with the kind of hatred that suggested he was done pretending to be reasonable. "You know what?" Mason said, getting out of his car. "I'm tired of this. Sophie, get your stuff. You don't have to listen to this anymore." "Actually, she does," I said, "because this is my apartment and you're trespassing. Try and stop me." Mason started walking toward the building entrance, and I realized that this was the moment I'd been building toward for weeks. All the evidence gathering, all the strategic planning, all the careful documentation, it all came down to this confrontation in front of my apartment building. I pulled out my phone and started recording. "For the record," I said, speaking clearly into the phone's microphone, "it's Tuesday, November 15th, approximately 9:30 p.m. Mason Torres, despite being told he's not welcome, is attempting to enter my private residence without permission." Mason stopped walking and turned around, suddenly aware that he was being filmed. "Turn that off," he said. "This is a public street. I have every right to record here." "Sophie, tell him to turn it off." Sophie looked back and forth between us, clearly realizing that she was caught between two men who were both done with pretending to be civilized. "Ryan, please," she said, "just let us get my things and we'll leave." "You can get your things? He can wait in the car." "That's not happening," Mason said, starting to walk toward me. This was it, the moment when Mason's carefully constructed image as a fitness professional and life coach would collide with the reality of who he actually was. I kept my phone steady, making sure to capture everything. "Mason Torres, personal trainer at Peak Performance Fitness, is now approaching me in a threatening manner," I narrated for the recording. "This is after weeks of pursuing my wife, manipulating her emotionally and financially, and now attempting to enter my private residence." "Shut up!" Mason lunged at me, trying to grab my phone. I stepped back, keeping the camera rolling as Mason stumbled forward. "And now he's attempting to destroy evidence of his behavior." Mason recovered his balance and came at me again, this time connecting with my shoulder and sending me stumbling backward. But I kept the phone up, kept recording, kept narrating. "Physical assault, captured on video, in front of multiple witnesses." And there were witnesses. Mrs. Grant was watching from her window, other neighbors had come out to see what the commotion was about, and someone across the street was clearly recording with their own phone. Mason seemed to realize this at the same time I did. He looked around at all the phones pointed in his direction, all the neighbors watching his carefully constructed image crumble in real time. "This is insane," he said, backing away from me. "Sophie, we're leaving." But Sophie wasn't moving. She was staring at Mason like she was seeing him clearly for the first time. Not the confident trainer who made her feel special, but an angry man who'd just assaulted her husband in front of half the neighborhood. "Mason," she said quietly, "maybe you should go." "What?" "Sophie, we talked about this. You're coming with me." I need to think. This is all happening too fast." Mason's face went through several emotions: confusion, anger, and finally a cold calculation that was probably more honest than anything I'd seen from him. "Fine," he said, "but don't come crying to me when you realize what a mistake you're making." He got back in his BMW and drove off, leaving Sophie and me standing on the sidewalk with an audience of neighbors and a phone full of incriminating video. "Well," I said, stopping the recording, "that was educational." Sophie was crying now, not the angry tears from our kitchen argument, but the kind of hopeless sobbing that comes from realizing you've made a series of terrible choices. "Ryan, I'm so sorry. I never meant for any of this to happen." "I know you didn't. But it did happen, and now we both have to deal with the consequences." "What happens now?" I looked at my wife, soon-to-be ex-wife, standing there in clothes I'd paid for, crying about a situation she'd created, and I felt something I hadn't expected. Pity. Not love, not anger, just a kind of sad understanding that Sophie had traded our marriage for a fantasy that was never going to be real. "Now you figure out who you actually are when you're not pretending to be someone else," I said. "And I figure out who I am when I'm not trying to save someone who doesn't want to be saved." Sophie nodded, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. Can I get my things?" "Of course. They're your things." We went upstairs together, and I watched Sophie pack her life into suitcases and boxes. It was remarkable how little space 3 years of marriage actually took up when you removed all the shared items, all the things that belonged to both of us or neither of us. "Where will you go?" I asked. "Viv's for now. I need to figure out what comes next." "What about Mason?" Sophie was quiet for a long moment, folding clothes with the kind of careful attention that suggested she was thinking about more than just packing. "I think I need to figure out who I am when I'm not trying to be who someone else wants me to be," she said finally. It was the most honest thing she'd said to me in months, and for a moment I remembered why I'd fallen in love with her in the first place. Before the Instagram posts and the credit card bills and the slow realization that we wanted different things from life. "That sounds like a good plan," I said. Sophie finished packing and called an Uber. We stood in the doorway of what used to be our apartment, looking at each other like strangers who'd shared a particularly intense elevator ride. "Ryan, for what it's worth, I really am sorry about all of it." "I know. Me too." She left, and I was alone in an apartment that suddenly felt bigger and quieter than it ever had before. I poured myself a glass of wine and sat down at my kitchen table, thinking about the past few months and the choices that had brought me to this moment. My phone buzzed with a text from Marta. "Saw the video on the neighborhood Facebook page. You okay?" I looked out my window and saw Mrs. Grant still standing on her balcony, probably composing the social media post that would turn tonight's events into neighborhood legend. "Better than okay," I texted back. "Free." The video of Mason's meltdown was online within an hour, shared across multiple neighborhood social media groups with commentary that ranged from supportive to gleefully scandalized. By morning, it had been viewed over 1,000 times, and Mason's gym was fielding calls from concerned clients who'd seen their trainer lose his temper on camera. Peak Performance Fitness terminated Mason's employment by the end of the week. His Instagram account, once full of motivational quotes and shirtless photos, went dark. The BMW disappeared from the neighborhood, along with any trace of the confident personal trainer who'd thought he could manipulate his way into other people's lives without consequences. Sophie moved in with Viv temporarily, then found a small apartment across town. She got a job at a marketing firm, her first real job in years, and slowly started building a life based on what she could actually afford rather than what looked good on social media. We finalized our divorce 6 months later. It was remarkably civil, considering everything that had happened. Sophie kept her car and her personal belongings. I kept the apartment and most of our shared assets. She didn't fight the settlement, probably because she understood that she'd been the one to break our marriage and I had the documentation to prove it. The last time I saw Sophie was at the courthouse, signing the final papers. She looked different. Older, maybe, but also more real. Less like a carefully curated Instagram post, and more like an actual person. "Are you happy?" she asked as we walked out of the building together. I thought about the question. Was I happy? I was certainly relieved, and I was definitely free from the constant stress of trying to manage someone else's poor choices. But happiness felt like something I'd need to build from scratch. "I'm getting there," I said. "What about you?" "Same. It's harder than I thought it would be, being responsible for myself. But it's also, I don't know, more honest, I guess." We stood there for a moment, two people who'd shared 3 years of marriage and were now sharing the awkward aftermath of its ending. "Ryan, I hope you find someone who appreciates you. Really appreciates you, not just what you can provide." "Thanks, Sophie. I hope you find someone who loves you for who you actually are, not who you're pretending to be." She smiled, a real smile, not the practiced expression she used for photos. Maybe we should both figure out who we actually are first. Maybe we should. Sophie walked away, and I watched her go without feeling the need to follow or fix or save. For the first time in years, her problems were her own to solve. I drove home to my quiet apartment, opened a bottle of wine, and started planning the rest of my life. It felt like the first day of something new, something built on truth instead of fantasy, something that belonged entirely to me. The only thing Sophie ever broke faster than my laptop was her own sense of invincibility. But in the end, that might have been the best thing she ever did for both of us.